My Playful Wife, Episode 13, What Meera Noticed. Written by Meera. Meera noticed things. I had understood this within an hour of meeting her, the way you understand the weather of a person before you have any specific evidence for it, just the pressure change of being near someone who is taking in more than they let on. But the evidence accumulated over 4 days, and by the end of it the accumulation was, frankly, impressive. The more so because she did so little with what she gathered. Most people who notice things are eager to be seen noticing. The noticing is half performance, a way of saying, look how much I see. Meera noticed the way a good camera notices, silently, for later, without any apparent need to develop the film in front of you. She noticed the way Saloni's attention distributed itself around a room, the slight asymmetry of warmth between her various subjects, the way she gave Piyush a particular register and me another and Meera a third, each one calibrated, none of them false. I watched Meera clock this on the second evening, watched her eyes move from Saloni with Piyush to Saloni with me and do a small private arithmetic and file the result. She noticed that the guest room had been prepared differently from ordinary domestic readiness, more carefully, more specifically, the flowers not a gesture but a decision. She said nothing, but on the second morning she thanked Saloni for the coconut dish by its regional name correctly, which was her way of saying, I saw what you did, I know what it cost you to know to do it, and Saloni's face did a small pleased thing at being caught. And she noticed, I am fairly sure, the calibration between Piyush and me, the way we occupied space together, the particular ease of two people who have arrived, through some unspoken process, at an understanding they did not used to have, an ease that is not the same as the ease of brothers who have always been easy, that has a slight deliberateness to it, the care of two people handling something between them that they have agreed not to name.
She would have seen that.
A person who notices the asymmetry of a hostess's warmth does not miss the texture of two brothers' truce. The clearest single instance came on the third night at dinner. We were several dishes deep into one of Saloni's 2-day spreads, the table loud and easy, when Piyush told a story from our childhood, the cat he had once smuggled into his hostel room and kept alive for a glorious illegal month, a story he tells often and badly and with enormous joy. Saloni had heard it a dozen times. She laughed anyway, in the right place, with real warmth, because she is generous with my brother's stories and always has been. But there was a half second, just before the laugh, when her face did a small private thing, a flicker that was not quite sadness, the particular expression of a person hearing a fond story about the family she married into and was forced, this year, to see all the way to the bottom of. It lived for less than a second. I only caught it because I am always, now, watching her. The watching has become the resting state of my face. Meera caught it too. I saw her catch it. She was across the table mid-sentence, and her eyes flicked to Saloni's face in precisely the half-second the flicker lived in, and then she did the kind thing, which is the part that stayed with me. She picked the story up. She asked Piyush a question about the cat, some detail, pulling the whole table's attention onto him and away from Saloni, buying Saloni the unwatched moment she needed to put her face back in order. She did it without signaling, smoothly, folded into the ordinary motion of dinner, so that no one who wasn't already watching would have registered that a small rescue had taken place at all. For a quarter of a second her eyes met mine over the dishes. Hers gave away nothing. Mine, I hope, said thank you. Then she was laughing at the cat with everyone else, and the moment sealed over itself, and only the two of us ever knew it had occurred. That was the thing about Meera, distilled. She noticed the wound. Anyone observant notices wounds. And then she noticed what the wound needed, which is the rarer and better skill, and what it needed was for everyone to look away. So she made everyone look away. I have spent my life around people who, having found a tender place in someone, cannot resist pressing it, if only to confirm it is there. Here was a woman who found the tender place and immediately, by instinct, covered it. I understood, in that 1/4 second across a dinner table, why my brother loved her. Understood it completely, watching her hand my wife back her own composure without anyone needing to know it had slipped. She said nothing about any of it. She was not the kind of person who said things before she was sure of them, and even once sure, she was the kind who weighed whether saying served any purpose before she spent the breath. On the last evening, the night before they left, she found me alone in the kitchen. Saloni and Piyush were in the living room. I could hear them through the wall, the voices of an ongoing conversation, the brother and sister-in-law register that had its own long history I would never fully have access to. I was at the sink, doing the small after-dinner things, when Meera came in and poured herself a glass of water from the matka and leaned against the counter, settling in with the body language of someone who has chosen this moment. "You're an interesting man," she said, not flirtatiously. There was nothing of that in it. Observationally, the way she'd say a piece of code was elegant or a fabric was well cut. "I'm very ordinary," I said. "That's what interesting people say." She drank some water. Ordinary people are usually quite keen to tell you the ways they're not. I dried my hands on the towel and turned to look at her properly. The sharp eyes, the composed manner, the glass held loosely. There was no threat in her, but there was a directness that I understood I was being invited to match. "Are you asking me something?" I said.
"No."
She considered the glass. Not asking. A pause, and then she set it down on the counter with the small click of a decision being made. "I just wanted to say, Piyush is lucky. In a lot of directions." She looked up. People are complicated. Most people spend their whole lives pretending they aren't, and pretending the people around them aren't, and the pretending is what breaks everything in the end. The ones who understand that people are complicated and don't run from it, who stay in the complication and make something out of it instead of fleeing to somewhere simpler, they're rarer than they should be. I think you might be one of them. That's all I wanted to say. I was quiet for a moment. It is a strange thing to be read accurately by someone you have known for 4 days. It bypasses all the defenses that years build, because the defenses are built against the people who were there for the years, and a stranger walks in under them. I felt, standing in my own kitchen, oddly exposed and oddly relieved, the way you feel when a doctor names the thing you've been afraid to name yourself. "How much does she know?" I asked. I meant Saloni, what Meera understood about Saloni, about the visits, about the shape of the year that had brought all of us to this kitchen. "Some things," she said again. The same phrase Piyush had used, and I wondered if they had agreed on it or arrived at it separately, two careful people reaching for the same careful words. Not everything. What she needs to know, to be safe in her own life. Not the parts that are only yours to carry. She looked at me steadily. I don't need the whole map. I need to know the ground is solid where I'm standing. He's given me that. The rest is yours and his. I thought about that, the parts that are only yours to carry, and felt something settle in me that had been faintly unsettled since they'd arrived. The fear, never quite spoken, that the year would have to be relitigated every time a new person entered the frame, explained and justified and refelt. Meera was telling me it wouldn't, that a thing could be known partially and held respectfully, that not every door in a house has to be open for the house to be a home. "She seems good," I said, meaning Meera herself, turning it back. "She is good. Meera said simply, without false modesty, which I also liked. From the living room, Saloni's laugh, the real one, the stomach one, all the way in. We both heard it. Something passed between Meera and me. Hearing it, a shared brief gladness at the sound of a person we both, in our different ways, cared about being happy. "You too," I said. She smiled. The slow one, the one that took its beat to arrive, and then arrived completely. "We should all have dinner," she said, properly. "In Bengaluru, in my city, on my ground. You should come. Both of you." Saloni mentioned Piyush said that. "I'm saying it too," she said. "And when I say a thing, it happens. Piyush says things the way you set a kite loose and hope the wind takes it. I say them the way you book the tickets." She picked her water glass back up. "So, it'll happen." I believed her. There was no reason not to. "Okay," I said. "We'll come." She went back to the living room. I stayed in the kitchen a moment longer, listening to the four of us, Saloni's voice, Piyush's, Meera's rejoining them, the sound of an evening winding down, a family that had assembled itself in an unexpected shape and was, against all reasonable prediction, working. I thought, she is 24. She is younger than the marriage she has just diagnosed. And she has more sense about how people actually survive each other than I had at 35 before the year taught me. I wrote it down later. Meera in the kitchen, the parts that are only yours to carry. She is 24 and she handed me, without knowing she was doing it, the sentence I'd been looking for all year. Not everything has to be confessed, to be honest. Some things you carry, so the people you love don't have to. I lay awake that last night longer than I meant to. Beside me, Saloni slept the way she sleeps after good days, all the way under, her breathing gone slow and even. In the next room, my brother and the woman he would one day bring back as his wife slept too, and the flat held all four of us in the dark, and I lay there turning over what Meera had said at the sink. The parts that are only yours to carry. I had spent so much of the year afraid of being known, afraid that the truth of us, if a single new person so much as glimpsed it, would curdle in their mouth into the cheap and obvious thing, the thing with the crude one-word name that small people would give it. And here was this 24-year-old who had glimpsed it, more than glimpsed it, had read the whole household in 4 days, and had not reached for the cheap name at all, had reached instead for complicated, and for the ones who stay, and had handed me, without quite knowing she was doing it, a more generous way to hold my own life than the way I had been managing to hold it. Saloni stirred. "You're awake," she said, not opening her eyes, a statement, the way she does, not a question. Thinking. Still. A pause.
About what?
"Meera," I said. "She's good for us. Not only for him. For us." Saloni was quiet a moment, surfacing just far enough to consider it properly. "She is," she said. "She makes the room bigger." Then she found my hand under the blanket and held it and went back under, all in one motion, and I lay there holding my sleeping wife's hand and thought that a marriage is partly the people it can survive being seen by, that you could almost measure the soundness of a thing that way, by who you could let look at it without flinching, and that ours, it turned out, could be seen clear to the floor by a person who missed nothing and could stay standing afterward. I slept, eventually. They left the next morning. The goodbye at the door was different from the previous ones, and the difference was a kind of progress. Piyush hugged Saloni, still held, still real, but briefer than the goodbyes of the old days, the ones that used to have a whole unspoken history compressed into their length. Something had settled in him. The urgency had gone out of it. He was a man with a life of his own now, a flat and a job and a woman beside him with sharp eyes and booked tickets, and the goodbye to Saloni had become what it was supposed to have been all along, warm, familial, finite. He shook my hand, held it the usual beat, the beat that had become our private punctuation. "Come to Bengaluru," he said. "We will," I said. Meera hugged Saloni, a real hug, 2 arms, the unguarded hug of 2 people who have decided over 4 days that they like each other and intend to go on liking each other across the distance. Then she shook my hand with the same firm, dry grip as the arrival, the symmetry deliberate, a person closing a bracket she had opened. "Hold him to it," she said, "about Bengaluru. He'll mean it, and forget it. You won't forget." "I won't," I said. The lift. The doors closing on the 2 of them, Piyush lifting a hand, Meera's composed nod. The mechanical sound of the cables, the descent. The city outside, ordinary and bright, a Wednesday resuming. Saloni and I stood in the quiet flat. The flat that had held 4 people for 4 days and was now exhaling back into its 2-person shape. The guest room already, in my mind, reverting. "She's extraordinary," Saloni said. "Yes," I said. "She is." A pause. Saloni looked around the living room, at the cushions disarranged, the glasses not yet cleared, the small wreckage of hospitality, and I watched her not move to fix any of it, which was its own small evidence of ease. "Are you okay?" she asked. She asked it differently now than she used to. There had been a period, months, when "are you okay" from her was a braced question, a hand held out toward possible damage, the asker already half flinching from the answer. This was not that. This was simply curious, interested in the actual state of me, the way you're interested in the weather of a place you love. The question had been emptied of its fear and refilled with something better. "Yes," I said, and meant it, plainly, with nothing held back behind the word. She nodded, satisfied, and went to the kitchen and made chai for the 2 of us now, the proportions automatically adjusted, 2 cups instead of 4, the domestic arithmetic resetting without anyone having to announce it. I cleared the glasses. We moved around each other in the small space with the unconscious choreography of 3 years and a hard year layered on top of it. She handed me my cup at the right moment, the right temperature, the right hand, without my asking, the way she always had, the small daily evidence of being known that I had once received without noticing, and now received the way you receive a gift. I had thought, before the visit, that adding a person to the frame would mean reliving the year, that every new arrival would have to be told, or made to sense, or carefully managed around, that I would spend the rest of my life explaining us to people. Meera had quietly disproved it. You did not have to explain. You did not even have to be wholly understood. You had only to be among people willing to let the unexplained parts be, who could hold a thing without needing to crack it open and see how it worked. The frame could grow. It could take a 4th corner and a 5th and not collapse. That was the discovery the 4 days had handed me, larger than I had registered while they were happening, that the life we had built was not a fragile secret to be guarded, but a sturdy thing that could be lived in, openly, in front of people, in the light. I sat a while longer in the cooling kitchen after she'd gone to the other room, not yet ready to give the day up. For people, 1 flat, a festival of light behind us and a wedding, surely, somewhere ahead. I had walked onto a balcony a year ago, a man who believed his life was one fixed shape, settled and known and finished, and I was sitting now in a kitchen that had held this week more people and more kinds of love than that man could have made room for in a lifetime. Meera had seen all of it and named none of it and stayed for dinner. It was, I thought, the best possible verdict, not absolution, which I had not asked for and did not need, but something plainer and better, that we were a household a clear-eyed stranger could sit down inside and find simply good. The flat settled around us, the right size for two, the new geometry holding, and a standing invitation to Bengaluru sitting in the air between us like a door someone had left ajar. "We should go," Saloni said, reading my mind or reading the door. "In February, when her ticket saying makes it happen." In February, I agreed. To be continued in episode 14, Distance and Closeness.
Simbolo di copyright Mia.
All rights reserved. That was episode 13 of My Playful Wife. If this story is staying with you, the next episode is already waiting. Subscribe so you don't miss it. The complete book is on Amazon, and early episodes plus bonus chapters are on my Patreon. Links are in the description.
I've Mia.
Thank you for listening.